Thank you, Merrill. Bill has graciously agreed to share his slides when we send the link to the recording for the event. So those of you who would like that, you'll be able to review his slides.
It's in St. John's in there.
Bill is a principal at Powers Engineering and on the board of Protect Our Communities Foundation, that I'm sure he'll talk about some tonight. He has been deeply involved in arguing for sensible, clean energy for San Diego for many years, provided key insights for San Diego decarbonization efforts. I've read personally multiple of Bill's papers and watched multiple webinars in which he's been a presenter, with great interest. Tonight, Bill's going to discuss options for public power and much more, and we're really thrilled to have Bill with us tonight. Bill, over to you.
Thank you very much, Joe. I really appreciate the chance to speak with North County Climate Change Alliance tonight. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm going to pull up the slides so that we can look at them. And we're going to start with slide 1 at change of pace. So thank you everyone for coming to listen to the presentation tonight. And I'll end with public power, but I'll start with a little 101 on how the grid works and the system works and what our conventional approach is in the state now and what the potential and possibilities are for local solar and battery storage to be the lead card. We'll start with just a basic 101 on how the grid works, and let's walk through this diagram. On the upper left, you have a generation plant. This is a conventional plant, but it could be a solar farm or a wind farm in Imperial County. High voltage transmission. This could be the Sunrise Power Link from Imperial County to load centers in San Diego County. And then delivering power into this red oval. This red oval is the urban suburban load center where voltage drops down to what they call a distribution level, maybe 12 volts, and it's feeding directly into commercial buildings on the right, homes on the left. So just to orient you on the basics of the grid. So we all live in San Diego Gas and Electric Service Territory. We get our power supply now from Community Choice Aggregator, either San Diego Community Power or Clean Energy Alliance. But the fundamental way the system works hasn't changed in a century or more, which is the investor-owned utilities are private monopolies. They're regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission, and they make a guaranteed profit on capital investments, basically steel in the ground. That's how they make money. That's how they've been making money for a century, and that's the way it looks to be for some time into the future. When it comes to customer-owned rooftop solar battery power, I'll just quote from the IOU lobbying arm's take on what that means to the industry. Potential obsolescence of existing business and regulatory models, adverse impact to utility investors. So their perspective is very much focused on the bottom line in terms of which way to go. So taking the Sunrise Power Link as an example, which entered into service in 2012, and I must say was part of my launch as an activist, is working to get a local power alternative to the Sunrise Power Link. And just an interesting historical note, we actually won that fight at the Public Utilities Commission. The administrative law judge in 2008 determined that denied the Sunrise Power Link, but because of a quirk of how it works at the commission, the president of the commission could submit an alternate decision, which the commission then voted to approve, and we had the Sunrise Power Link. So at the other end, this is a giant solar farm, and this is basically what we're looking at. Either we do mostly this, and that's currently the state's proposal for the future, or we look at a more local solution. And since this is a North County group, I just wanted to, as a lead in to the issue of, which we'll look at in more detail later, is why is it so time consuming to get these big projects built in our county, or sometimes Imperial County, in places where you think it would be quite straightforward? Usually because that land's already in use in some fashion. Either it's conservation land, or it's farmland, or it's occupied by someone with their backcountry retreat. Something is happening, and you're now going to squeeze in a major piece of infrastructure. So I'm using an example here that this is a small facility. This was only about 3 megawatts, maybe 30 acres, located in Valley Center, solar farm. Jury award of over $6 million in November of 2022 because of impacts on surrounding landowners, runoff from the farm, and so the solar farm. And so it's important to keep in mind that one of the reasons that going big is tough to do, especially in this county, is there are already land uses underway in those areas. So within the scope of just basic background is the county initiated a process called the Regional Decarbonization Framework a couple of years ago to set a framework for how we would decarbonize in the county. What approach would we take? And the approach laid out is very much like San Diego Gas and Electric's approach, which is we would do transmission dependent, large industrial scale solar and wind projects. And if it was limited to the county, this map shows where we would put these projects. And there is nothing like showing on a map where you're about to put a huge solar wind facility to get a lot of interest in the communities that are smack in the middle of those diagrams. And that's exactly what happened. A lot of pushback from backcountry communities. We got engaged in this in part because this is the investor and utilities plan. Why is the county putting out a plan of this type? And ultimately, we found a lot of major errors in the assumptions in this document, and we challenged it in court. And our first date in court is tomorrow. And challenging, the county is claiming that this was just basically little more than a back of the envelope projection of the future, while we are seeing it as the framework for what we're going to do in the future. And at least initially, it looks like we had the upper hand, but we'll be in court on this issue tomorrow. And we're advocating that if you would crunch the numbers properly, this would be a distributed local solar plan with the attendant battery storage. So why is, in my view, why is local solar looking so good, especially from a ratepayer standpoint, from saving money? This diagram is the green line is San Diego Gas and Electric, the orange line Pacific Gas and Electric, the blue line Southern California Edison. So why am I putting this up here? What this graphic is showing is how fast are the toll charges climbing on the power that you receive over the grid. And back 10 years ago, the toll charge was not insignificant in San Diego Gas and Electric, where the green line, maybe 2 cents a kilowatt hour. But in the course of 1 decade, it's climbed to 6 cents a kilowatt hour, and it's on target to go up to well over 10 cents in a few years. That's just the toll charge that we get charged on every kilowatt hour that we pay for as electric consumers. So the most recent development, and this was one of the reasons that we pushed back so hard in the county's regional decarbonization framework, is our position is that you're setting up the next multi-billion-dollar transmission line. If you're asserting that the least cost approach to decarbonization is to do these big remote facilities, we are tapped out on transmission, or we will be soon. So we're going to have to build another line. That was our assertion then. And in May 2023, just a few months ago, the independent system operator that does the initial authorization for large transmission lines authorized a multi-billion-dollar transmission line. that would come out of Imperial County, go into North San Diego County, and then tie in up in Orange County. And interesting commentary from the article in the UT about this in May. And getting back to this point I'm making, that there are already uses of the land that this line would traverse. And there was a quote in there from GridWorks, which I thought was spot on. Such a line will be extremely challenging to permit and may prove to be simply infeasible, given the mountains, parks, and developed suburbs that lie in the proposed path. And much of the media is about people need to get with the program. I mean, we've got to do it this way, and they just have to accept their fate that we need to run these transmission lines through their land, through whatever they're doing. And I think GridWorks' comment is right on the money. That's going to be tough to do when people were there first. So we pay the highest electricity rates in the nation in SDG territory, in part for a couple of the issues I've already mentioned. Average residential retail rate today, if you're you're not on a discount program, which 75% of the residential customers are not on any kind of a discount program, you're paying an average of 47 cents a kilowatt hour. That will reach 70 cents a kilowatt hour in a few years. That's the projection of the California Public Utilities Commission. So if you thought 47 cents a kilowatt hour is a lot, that's going to be the good old days in a couple of years. At the same time, the investor-owned utilities as a block are fighting relentlessly and effectively to undercut rooftop solar, customer-owned solar power. I was an expert witness in the net metering proceeding, put in testimony about actually the existing tariff at the time, NEM 2.0, is a good deal for all ratepayers because it's retarding and slowing what would otherwise be a breakneck development of new transmission. And the newest twist, and the utilities are on a roll, they are winning on these issues. The newest twist is fixed charges, that the fixed charges will be imposed on all customers. They would be income graduated, which has created a lot of controversy. And they would be significant. I mean, if you're a mid-range income family in San Diego, you'll pay at least approximately $80 fixed charges per month. If you're a little better than average, you'll pay about $130 a month. If you don't have solar, it's not going to do much to your bill. Your bill is going to look about the same. But if you're a solar customer now and you're paying $10 a month to the utility, you will be paying, again, if you're a little above average, you'll be paying $130 a month in the middle of 2024. So this fixed charge rate is, in my view, targeting rooftop solar owners. And it's particularly egregious given that those earlier solar adopters, they crunched the numbers for themselves on, is this going to pan out? Is this going to pencil out? And it's a new ballgame if everyone ends up paying fixed charges. And so, not surprisingly, the nonprofit I'm on the board of, the Protect Our Communities Foundation, is engaged in that fixed charge debate and pushing back on it. So let's step back 90 years, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And in the utility world, he presented a famous speech. It's still famous. It's 90 years old. Before he was elected to office, 1932, run up to the election. This speech was in Portland, Oregon. And it was about how utility commissions have to fight for the people, for the system to work. And I worked before numerous utilities commissions around the country. The commissions don't work. And he made some good points, which is these commissions can't just be umpires between the investor and utilities that have all the money, all the technical knowledge, all the lawyers, and the public who does not have any of those cards. But it's got to be an aggressive advocate for the people, and if it's not, the system's broken. Meaning, the The utilities are in control of a private monopoly system and are basically setting their own rules and their own rates. And that's where we're at the moment in California. So now talking about happier things, and an interesting phenomenon that's occurring over time is that the cost of production of a rooftop solar installation, and in this case, I'm talking about commercial rooftops like a Costco or a Walmart or Target size array, and utility scale solar, they're converging over time. And in this table, we're looking at, and this is a gold standard cost estimate. This comes from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, Boulder, Colorado. They put out an annual technology baseline XLS spreadsheet, which is great because it has utility scale solar next to commercial rooftop solar, next to residential rooftop, same metrics, same approach. So you can do essentially an apples to apples comparison. So here, 2023, projection for California desert solar, state-of-the-art production cost, $25 a megawatt hour. Commercial rooftop, San Diego coastal, $53. Okay, so about $30 a megawatt hour, about 3 cents a kilowatt hour. 2030 projection, utility scale dropping to $17 a megawatt hour. Commercial rooftop, $32 a megawatt hour. So the difference, the delta has closed a bit. Instead of being nearly 3 cents, now it's 1.5 cents. 2035, desert solar, $16, commercial rooftop, 30. Not that different, still about a penny and a half. So paying a bit of a premium for the commercial rooftop production cost. So hold that thought. So there was a great, not great, but a comprehensive, good article in the UT a few months ago that looked at the big question is, okay, so we now have a new $2 billion plus transmission line facing us. The states lined up behind it, utilities lined up behind it. Is this the way to go? And is this the future we want? Is this it? Or is saturation rooftop solar and battery storage in the city a better option? And so it was about the first time I've seen a frontline story that really asked the right questions. Unfortunately, the UT has been bought out. They're already cutting staff, and this excellent writer, Joshua Emerson Smith, is no longer at the UT. He was going to do a series. This was the first article in the series that will not happen. An issue that came up in the regional decarbonization framework, and one of the things that we attacked relentlessly, is the idea that we had very little rooftop solar and parking lot solar to work with, that it really doesn't matter what the cost of it is because there isn't much of it. And that was an easy target for us. That the data in this document was just so scattershot that they actually included estimates that were huge for solar potential, rooftop potential, but then without calculations showed a final number that was, a fraction of that. And so the point of this particular photograph, this is the San Diego County Education Center in Linda Vista community of San Diego. And the reason for that yellow outline is just to show how effectively you can pack in solar on a parking lot, if that's what you choose to do, to maximize the potential of that parking lot. And so when someone were to say to you, well, San Diego County's only got 2,000 megawatts of commercial solar parking lot potential, what's your assumption? Well, my assumption is we can only use 10% of it for solar. Why is that? Well, I don't really know. And so the point of putting a picture like this out is to say, if you want to saturate solar in a parking lot, you can do it, but that's got to be your objective, not just assuming that for a variety of reasons, you only get to utilize a small part of it. So this base graphic is from the Air Resources Board 2022 scoping plan for achieving carbon neutrality. This is their view of how we're going to get to carbon neutrality in 2045. And these bars are showing ever increasing amounts of grid power that we're going to need to get there. And this is, I mean, if the state follows through on its plan, which is 70% plus of the solar that we develop going forward is going to be industrial scale remote, and it's going to be coming in over the grid, and the wind power too, but to a much lesser extent. Sure, this is what the future looks like, that we're going to be packing a lot of power on transmission lines that have been yet to be built. But that black arrow that I overlay is, what if we go big on local solar and battery storage in the cities, in the built communities? Well, then those bars reverse. They get smaller, that our transmission system is fine. It's big enough now. And we build from within. And this is an interesting, this is a photo of some warehouse rooftops up in the Riverside, Ontario area where all the logistics warehouses are. And interesting backstory is that when Arnold Schwarzenegger was governor, interesting, yes, a bull in the China shop in a way, but a useful bull in the utility commission, investor-owned utility arena, because he wasn't beholden to any of them. I mean, he came out of nowhere actually to become governor, and he's by far the biggest solar advocate we've had as a governor, even though he's a Republican governor. And he signed off on the Million Solar Roofs program, the residential rooftop program. But he also, it just kind of a classic story. He said, look, I'm going to campaign events, making speeches. I'm in my helicopter. I'm flying over Fresno. I'm flying over Bakersfield, LA, and I see square miles of warehouse rooftops with nothing on them. Let's get solar on the rooftops. And so the only reason a governor of California can say something like that and get it done is because he's not beholden to the investor-owned utilities. And so they were jumping up to say, you bet, Governor, we can do it. SCE said, we can do it. We can do it big. And ultimately, the commission in 2009 signed off on the largest solar project ever conceived in California. And it was a warehouse rooftop solar project, 500 megawatts. Each one of these rooftops is about 2 megawatts. You figure 2, 4, you need about 100 of these rooftops, maybe 120 to get 500 megawatts. That was the plan. That was the plan until Schwarzenegger left office, and the utilities were able to work with the governor more friendly to them and reduce that program from 500 megawatts to 100 megawatts. That's about what was built. We can do the same thing on the residential and commercial level. These are just a couple of Tesla Powerwalls in a residential home, residential structure, and then a somewhat larger battery bank at a commercial building location. But just as in that prior slide, what SCE was doing was aggregating 100 rooftops. You can aggregate thousands of these into a virtual power plant. And some utilities are actually doing it at scale. Green Mountain Power is the pioneer of this, where I had a discussion with them a couple of weeks ago, and I said, hey, Green Mountain Power, some forms of competitors to the Powerwall have dropped the price in half from the Powerwall. Your program partially buys the Powerwalls for your customers. But if the price were half of what you're assuming it is for the Powerwall, could you just give the Powerwalls to the customers and then dispatch into your independent system operator grid and make enough money to at least break even? And the answer was yes. So talking about rooftop solar and batteries compared to industrial scale remote solar and wind in our county, San Diego County, what's a scorecard look like? Rooftop solar, battery storage owned by the customer, 2,000 megawatts, almost exactly as at the end of June 2023. We have the highest concentration of rooftop solar in the state, and SDG&E has had almost nothing to do with it other than to try and put a few tripwires in the way. It's just people like you and me, and I'm sure many of you on this call have solar. It's just individuals making good decisions for their own reasons with no environmental impacts, no environmental controversy, and on we go. Second bullet, we're on target this year, even though this may be the last year we do this for a while. we're on target this year to put in more than 300 megawatts of rooftop solar. The first half of this year through June 30th in SDG&E territory, which is essentially the county, we installed 159 megawatts of rooftop solar, which translates into 320 megawatts for the year. So keep 300 megawatts, hold on to that for a minute. And another important development, because the wages of solar workers have been a controversial issue, and one of the reasons that IBEW has pushed back on rooftop solar as being inadequate wages, not good jobs for workers. The law was passed, I think it's AB 2143, a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, maybe a year ago, which requires that all commercial projects which are projects above 15 kilowatts, must pay prevailing wages as of January 2024. So within 4 months' time, any installer doing commercial projects needs to pay those commercial crews prevailing wage. And I think it's probably going to be tough to distinguish between commercial and residential project workers, because at smaller companies, all workers do all things. They do commercial projects, they do residential projects. My guess is the prevailing wage will just have to be the standard starting in 2024. So I won't challenge. I'll leave as moot the issue of how a typical solar installer wage pre-January 1, 2024 compares to a union wage. But in concept, starting on January 1, 2024, supposed to be equivalent to a union wage. So getting back to 300 megawatts, in 20 years of effort, how much utility scale solar and wind do we have in this county? Well under 300 megawatts. And most of it was hard fought by the people who lived in the areas where it was to be put. And in some cases, it's still hard fought. It's not going to get easier. It's not like somebody can wave a wand and say, we're going to put in 3,000 megawatts of large scale, expansive solar and wind project in this county, and it's going to happen. The resistance is just going to build. And so that reality is not, and it's the same at the state level. And the idea that you can just mandate, we're going to do 100,000 megawatts of solar and wind wherever, it's easy enough to put on a piece of paper. It's a lot tougher to make it happen, unless it's on rooftops. So that's my intro to the public power option, which is taking up a lot of my time right now, and it's good time. There's a more and more of a movement around the country to look at the public power option for a community to go to community-owned electric provision, electric utility, to put the stops on just out of control utility spending on what are frankly boondoggles, and that we don't need to build the next $2 billion transmission line when we have options that are not favorable to the utility's bottom line, but they're favorable to everybody else. And the utility's bottom line is not immutable. In some states, especially Hawaii, they're coming up with more creative ways for utilities to make money so that we're not just locked into this build more capital infrastructure or oppose anything else. San Francisco periodically over the years pushes to expand the public utility that they have to include all of the residents of San Francisco. And that effort is kicked in gear again, with San Francisco attempting to become the electric distribution utility for the entire city, everyone there. And they have a reasonably good chance to do that. They're in PG&E territory. PG&E's got a lot of issues to deal with. Another big public power effort that I've been tracking quite closely is the Our Power Maine campaign. They were successful in a citizen signature gathering initiative to put public power on the ballot in Maine this November. In 3 months, they would displace 2 investor-owned utilities in that state and displace it with what they call a consumer-owned electric utility. Interesting for those of us in the city of San Diego is our population is 1.4 million. The population of Maine is 1.4 million. And Plus, they've done a lot of good work in that we have been attempting to replicate with their permission and working with them, but a great effort going on in Maine. And it's also important to understand that we have many longstanding public electric utilities in the state. We have Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, Sacramento Municipal Utility District, Imperial Irrigation District to the east. And this is just a map showing the service territories of various utilities. San Diego Gas and Electric front and center, but the larger area-wise utility to the east is Imperial Irrigation District, and then up to the upper left, Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. So about 25% of the population of the load in California is served by public utilities. And they consistently have much lower rates than investor-owned utilities. This is a graphic that was produced by the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, which is for us in the city of San Diego, our direct analog. The number of customers they have is about 600,000. That's how many utility customers are in San Diego. Their load is a little bit higher. The population they serve is about the same. So it's a good analog for San Diego. One thing that's not an analog is how much customers pay. SDG&E customers pay 3 times approximately as much as SMUD customers pay. SDG&E is the top orange bar, SMUD is the bottom blue bar. And this is how much they pay for the same amount of power in a month, 750 kilowatt hours a month. So how does it work? Well, part of it's pretty straightforward. These 2 bars are demonstrating what happens if you switch. Let's say you switch a switch overnight. You're an investor in utility one day, and the next day you're public utility. Investor in utility on the left, public utility on the right. Well, the public utility doesn't pay any profit. The gross profit that SDG&E is currently making, at least in 2022, was approaching 20%. And out of that, they collect from us and then pay taxes. So their net profit is somewhat lower. And then when they do these capital projects, some of that money is borrowed money, and they borrow at private rates. A public utility borrows at muni rates, which are lower rates, so that if this money to pay for a portion of the Sunrise Powerlink, for example, is borrowed at 7% interest over 20 or 30 years, that same capital money as a public utility would be 4% interest. So you save on the interest you pay. And so that's just out the gate. It's pretty meat and potatoes why the cost would be lower. And so now let's just switch to what this particular, at least my concept of what an electric distribution utility in the city of San Diego, and I keep emphasizing the city because in the city, we have a city charter, we have a charter right to take over electric utility function at any time. The city council chooses to do so, and to pay fair market value for the assets that we would buy, in this case from SDG&E. And so the concept is, let's go big on solar and battery storage in the city to save money. So how could we do that if production cost of a big array in the desert is lower than a rooftop in San Diego? How do we do that? Well, it's tied to these transmission charges, these toll charges that we're paying. This graphic shows that they talk of transmission charges in 2 categories. One is high voltage, and for the wonks, 200 kilovolts and up, and then lower voltage, but still under the control of the grid operator, which in California is the California Independent System Operator. And so part of the role of that operator is to allocate costs for all of these capital expenses going into transmission lines. And the blue line is the high voltage SDG&E transmission access charge. And you can look off to the left. In 2018, it was something less than $30 a megawatt hour. That up to over 30 in 2022, and then slowly moving up to approximately $40 a megawatt hour in 2030. So just keep that in mind. The lower voltage transmission, and a lot of this is that wildfire mitigation investment going into undergrounding lines in the backcountry and replacing wood poles with steel poles, and all of that activity is really pushing the cost of the lower voltage transmission to the metal. And you can see where those lines cross basically today, $30 a megawatt hour, but these are additive. So if it's 30 for the high voltage, 30 for the low voltage, that's $60 a megawatt hour. And it's quickly rising, especially what I'm relating to primarily the wildfire mitigation investment, which I must admit, I consider a total boondoggle. There are only 30,000 meters in the backcountry of San Diego. We could put solar and battery storage, or if they're under trees, a lot of battery storage on every one of those meters for almost no out-of-pocket cost to ratepayers. And we are not doing that. Instead, we are doing this endless multi-billion-dollar boondoggle. So how would it work if City of San Diego, and we can talk a little bit later if you want about expanding it into a joint powers authority, including more cities. But for now, I'll concentrate on what I'm focused on now, which is the City of San Diego. And getting back to that diagram or graphic we looked at earlier, so you have the remote power plant of some kind, wind, solar, conventional, high voltage transmission coming into the urban area. In the case where in that oval, let's call that the City of San Diego, there would be a toll booth and actually be a meter, at substation meter. There would be a toll booth that separates us from the wider grid, which is locally owned by, or in this art area owned by SDG&E. The power that we bring in through that toll booth, we have to pay that toll charge, which is getting larger and larger, and we'll look at that in a minute. Anything we generate inside that circle does not pay that toll charge. That toll charge is 5 cents a kilowatt hour. We don't pay it on what we generate in here. If it's 10 cents a kilowatt hour, we don't pay it if we generate in here. That's how we save money. How much money? So let's look at, we looked at an earlier graphic that looked at the cost of desert solar versus the cost of commercial solar. And let's just look at the year 2023. You see two numbers added and equals 72. Well, one of those numbers, the 25, that's the production cost of that grid solar in the desert. The 47 is the toll charge. That's the transmission charge. So together, $72 versus $53. What's the better deal in 2023? Let's look at 2027, because those transmission charges, those toll charges are moving fast. So now we know the second number, $20, that's production cost, solar. $73 toll charge. Total, 93. Commercial rooftop, 41. You decide, what's the better deal? How do we save cost? So what would this nonprofit electric distribution utility, what's the mission statement? Reduce rates by maximizing solar, battery storage, and energy conservation in the city, period. Again, getting back to that article, what would that look like? I mean, here's a commercial, not a very big commercial structure, where you largely saturate the parking lot, you saturate the rooftop, repeat 5,000 times. One of the big issues that has come up again and again with opponents of public power is, where are we going to get the billions of dollars that we will need to buy these assets? And one thing to lead off in this discussion is, in effect, what this is doing, we are already paying for those assets. The poles and wires that still have, that are still being paid off, we are paying for it. It's not like this is an additional expense that is new. But what you're doing when you're going from paying private mortgage rates to municipal bond public rates is that interest rate drops. This is no different than a homeowner who bought at a time when interest rates were higher, got a 30-year fixed at 7%. And then a few years later, they go to a 30-year fixed at 4%. And they save money. And so putting this in the context of, again, we're paying about 50 cents a kilowatt hour residential customers. And this cost next line. And we had a recent public power phase 1 study done in the city that estimated what kind of a Midland all-in price would be for the assets and the metering and startup costs at about 3.5 billion. So if we're paying 50 cents a kilowatt hour now, what would the amortized cost be of 3.5 billion at muni bond rates over 30 years with our current power demand of 8 billion kilowatt hours a year? 3 cents a kilowatt hour. That's what that translates into compared to our full bill at 50 cents. A consultant that was assisting the city in 2020 got it exactly right in talking about this. This does not move the needle much. It could be 3.5 billion, it could be 4.5 billion, it could be 5 billion. It does not move the needle much. And so that you'll hear that again and again in public power fights, and you'll hear it a lot in San Diego over the coming months about how this cost is so prohibitive and insurmountable, when in fact, you're basically refinancing your home, essentially. Another very big issue that comes up is unions, what will happen to SDG&E's union workers, and there are many, electricians most prominently, who are currently have a collective bargaining agreement with the utility through IBEW Local 465. And just a point of order, IBEW Local 465 also represents a public utility electrician workforce, the Imperial Irrigation District workforce. And by law, those CB, if there's a transition from an IOU to a public utility, those collective bargaining agreements have to be honored for a period of years. We would want this to be a union shop. All of the public utilities in the state are union shops, IBEW local shops. So that's not an issue. And there's something else we want to do, which is we want to boost the wages of those workers under that collective bargaining agreement by about 8%. And why would we do that? In part to show good faith, but in part to make a point that we can do that by simply adjusting the wage of the CEO of SDG&E and the wage of the CFO of SDG&E, 2 people. We adjust the wage of those positions to what the SMUD equivalents get paid. The CEO of Sacramento Municipal Utility District makes about $800,000 a year. The CFO makes a little bit less than that. That puts collectively $23 million on the table to use for other purposes. As a city of San Diego, where about half the load would be about half the operation. So that would put about $12 million on the table. We average that over the workers under that in the operations and maintenance department. We can boost their wages 8% without impacting our bottom line at all. And part of the point of this is to show how egregious the investor-owned utility executive pay is. And finally, we can't be certain that the market is necessarily going to provide us with the best prices for solar and battery storage. And so this utility would have authorization to own and operate its own solar and battery storage capacity in the city. And frankly, that would open up, a major growth area for union labor in the city of San Diego. So at this point, we're in the home stretch. This is the second to last slide. And conceptually, this is what it looks like, is that over time, initially on day one, we're still pulling all the power over those lines. But over time, we're concentrating our effort in that oval, and we're backing out how much power we take in over those lines. We're not getting rid of the lines. The lines still still need to be operated and maintained by a competent workforce, but we're not adding to those lines. We're backing power out of those lines, and we're not doing it to be obnoxious. We're doing it to save money. So just to recap on the public power opportunity, and this I've just brought up now, local control, controlling our own destiny, not feeling helpless because we can't get the time of day at the California Public Utilities Commission. This would not be regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission. Lowering rates, more accountability because it's under local control. Public utilities typically have higher reliability than investor-owned utilities, and a stronger local economy, especially with the direction and mission statement that would be set for this public utility. So thank you, Joe. And that is the end of the formal presentation.
Well, fantastic, Bill. Thank you so much. With absolutely compelling argument, it seems to me, but there are obviously many questions. I'd just like to jump in with the first one, and we'll turn to Kathy. In a variation on the theme of what you've been talking about, Tallahassee had the question of how do we motivate people to put solar on their rooftops, right, within the community and businesses. And so what they decided to do was select a feed-in tariff. Basically, they said to homeowners and business owners, if you install solar on your rooftop, we will pay you, I think their number was 32 cents a kilowatt hour for 15 years or some such thing as that, for all of the energy you produce that is beyond what you use for your business in your home. And within the first year, they had at least 5,000 people decide to put solar on the rooftop because they could earn money doing that and reduce their income. Doesn't that make sense as part of the formula that you're talking about here? We're going to get people to decide to deploy the energy, or deploy the solar and the batteries and so forth.
Absolutely. In fact, that is, I didn't go into that here, but for those of you that have a net metered solar installation, usually if you look up on your roof, it's not taking up your roof. It's taking up, a fraction of your roof. And that the part of this program would be to pay an attractive wholesale rate for overproduction. Meaning if you're only using a third of your available roof space now, you're incentivized economically to cover your roof with panels. And I don't know if the rate would be 32 cents. That sounds a little high, but it would be high enough to make it attractive to people.
Make it appealing, yeah. I mean, it seems like an obvious component of what you're talking about.
I think it is.
Kathy?
Yes, so John Eldon is concerned about the safety of lithium-ion batteries, the risk of fire, and he's wondering how real the problem is, how do we minimize risk, and he would just like you to comment on that issue, Bill, please.
Sure. That's a good question, and that's been often brought up. I think there are different lithium-ion chemistries, and one that is well known for having minimal fire risk is lithium iron phosphate, and that seems to be becoming the standard chemistry for home batteries, now even automotive batteries. And so part of it is, have a chemistry that minimizes fire risk. But an important point here, John, which is put the batteries out in a distributed way, small bits of batteries spread over a large area, not concentrating massive battery installations together. So if you've seen at some of the substations in the area where they have battery installations, half the installation is an air conditioning bank on the roof of the trailer to try and keep it cool inside. because you've concentrated so much energy in such a small spot. And so one way to avoid fire hazard, and a very effective one, is add small amounts of batteries with small amounts of solar on rooftops, residential rooftops, or even commercial buildings, but don't concentrate hundreds of megawatt hours of battery storage power in a small spot, because you can have problems with that. So doesn't mean you can't do it in a very large scale, but it takes quite a bit of engineering to do it safely. You don't need that level of care for fire if you just have small amounts of battery storage in each location.
Thank you. So Bill, have you or has anyone looked at the square feet or meters or whatever of rooftops and parking lots and candidate places to place solar, to identify what the potential capacity is, and then estimated what fraction of the potential has to be covered with solar to meet the community's requirements?
Are you asking if that has been done? Is
Yes.
calculating?
Yes.
Yes, we did that in the regional decarbonization critique we did, just to point out that even using their own numbers, that we have more than enough. And what we used is the baseline, and I'm not sure this baseline is even, I agree with it, but the state through the Air Resources Board has projected that bar chart I showed of rising need. So they've done their projection of, we electrify everything and we take all the steps, how much electricity are we going to need? So I use that to say, how much potential solar do we have in San Diego County? And is it enough to provide that amount of electricity as an alternative future? And it's far more than enough to provide that. So we know that. In fact, for those of you who haven't used this tool, Google has a Project Sunroof tool, which is an amazing tool. The installers use it. A lot of them use it now. If you were just to look at Google Project Sunroof, you can look at your own home. I use that to calibrate that tool to see if it was accurate. And you can go right down to your home and look at your roof and get a response. And you can make your own call about whether you think it's realistic what they've done. But I say that only to point out that there's some great tools that are readily available to the public generally to estimate solar potential. And the issue in the regional decarbonization framework is the authors used a tool similar to that, came up with a huge number, and then converted it without citation or anything into a very small number. And we said, that's a problem, because your base number is obviously more than enough to completely cover the need, but you've converted it without indicating how you did it into a small number. And so I would recommend to anyone, if you get anything out of this talk, Google Project Sunroof is just an incredible tool.
So just to follow up on that a bit, if we saturated San Diego, what percentage of the capacity would be met? Is it 150%, 250?
That's a good question that I haven't asked, meaning it's substantially more than we need. But that's a good question, is how much could we export if we saturated beyond what we need? It would be significant, but I can't give you a number like 50% and I should also be fair to the accuracy of the numbers. For example, for years when people projected how much you could get out of a parking lot, a base assumption was 25% of the parking lot could be covered with solar. That's one of the reasons I use that photo in my presentations is, okay, you can use that assumption if you want, but if you really want to maximize the parking lots, you'd saturate them. You wouldn't just assume there's a portion. So what I've ended up doing over the years is saying, if you use a somewhat obsolete base case assumption, you have this much parking lot potential. If you use an aggressive assumption that we're going to actually try and cover as much as we can, you may get 3 times as much potential. And so when you ask the question, how much more do we have than we need? I can tell you we have substantially more than we need, but it really depends on, you're going to take the mid-range or the max range of that.
Thanks. Kathy?
Let's see. Henkel Smith would like to know your opinions on V to X, V to home, V to grid. And yeah.
My opinion is, it is the key to unlocking the future. I think it's absolutely critical. I think that I didn't talk about it. I made a decision earlier not to include any slides on this, but I'm a big fan of Plan C, which is go off grid. I mean, with the cost of solar and storage and now the proliferation of electric vehicles that have bidirectional capability, that a bidirectional EV is like a super powered genset that conventionally would have been backing up an off-grid system. But I mean, and I think some developers are just coming out with package deals. But to me, the great thing about today is, if you get fed up, just go off grid. And sure, you'd have to be a little bit of a pioneer at this moment, but just a little bit. And that may end up, if the utilities prove to be simply too politically powerful to be sidelined, going off grid is a great alternative.
One of our speakers a couple of years ago was a man named Tony Seba, and his team from an organization called Rethink X. And Rethink X did some fascinating models in which they looked at how to minimize the cost for decarbonization and generation and so forth. And what they discovered was that if you overproduce, this is their model, if you overproduce energy, you need less in the way of batteries. And there's a point where, if you think of it as a U-curve, there's a point where you hit minimum cost by overproducing. And it seems to me that if we factored that in, it would even further support saturating the rooftops and in driving down the cost by minimizing the battery requirements. Does that make sense to you? You familiar with the Rethink work?
I'm not familiar with the Rethink work. I am familiar with the concept of overbuilding the solar to minimize the amount of battery storage that you would need. And but I think of that more in terms of an off-grid system, where if you have more solar power than you need, then you can reduce the amount of battery storage. And I say that we operated off-grid here in San Diego for a few years until we threw the rod of the single piston genset we had backing the system up. That's why I'm transitioning to a bidirectional EV. But I haven't, to be fair to myself, I haven't dug into that macro concept. I'm familiar with it on a single residence basis only.
Fantastic. Thanks. Kathy?
Okay, let's see here. Charles Langley would like to, or I think I'm pronouncing your name correctly, hopefully. Charles, he would like to know, do your electric rate increase projections include a 3 to 5% increase for all California ratepayers to pay off Newsom's loan SB 846 to PG&E to pay for Diablo Canyon's license extension?
I would expect a question like that from Mr. Langley. Thank you, Charles. And frankly, I don't know. What I did was took the PUC's projected rate increase for SDG&E, which is 10.4% per year for the next 3 or 4 years. That's where the 10% comes from. But I'm not sure. I would hope, Charles, that that's baked into it, but I am not sure.
One of the books that I have really appreciated in the past few months is Mark Jacobson's No Miracles Needed. One of the things that Mark talks about is combining wind and solar, again, to reduce the overall cost, because the wind tends to blow at night and the sun tends to shine in the daytime, kind of thing. And there's a balance there. Do you see a place for offshore solar in the formulations that you're thinking about?
Offshore wind?
Yeah. I mean, to balance, to reduce the cost again, and to balance the need for, or reduce the need for a battery.
Well, first of all, I should say that I'm a big admirer of Mark Jacobson. I think he's been very courageous in putting out his position on the accessibility of tools available now to do this. Mm-hmm. And I have to admit, though, I am not a big fan of offshore solar or offshore wind. And the reason is not environmental, though I'm sure there's some environmental issues with it, but the cost of production is very high, and the cost of getting undersea transmission back to shore to do this, it'll work. It's just going to be very expensive. My feeling is that you get the same bang for the buck with solar arrays and battery storage. I mean, battery storage is kind of a game changer. The idea that wind at night, solar in the daytime was very true, I think, 10, 15 years ago, before the advent of relatively cost-effective battery storage. 10 years ago, we were barely talking about battery storage being cost-effective enough to serve a big role. Now it's go-to because its cost has dropped so much. So I think so much depends on the economics. I mean, at this point, I see I'm working on offshore wind in a couple of cases, one in California, one in North Carolina. And so I just look at the costs, and it's a very expensive proposition. So I can't say I'm enthusiastic about it.
Okay, thanks. Kathy?
I have to read it, Eve. Eve thinks you're positively dreamy, Bill, and she'd like to clone you. She's wondering if we can do that. And she thanks you for everything you do. And she's wondering, have we made any headway, or have we made any headway with unions, and might that be an inroad, for making some progress?
Well, thank you, Eve. I appreciate the kind words. And the unions are in a bit of a bind because they have a collective bargaining agreement that essentially requires loyalty to the counterparty, which in this case is San Diego Gas and Electric. And so it's a tough position to be in. We're hoping that a couple of unions would see the potential benefits for their union members, meaning if we can start to curb how fast these rates are increasing and eventually get to a point where they're decreasing, that, as all of you know, it's become pretty controversial how much we're paying for electricity. And so there are dynamics within the union movement too. There are some unions where the workers are relatively poorly paid and they pay electricity bills. And so they have a vested interest in looking at a way not to pay such high electricity bills. At the same time, the union that is the SDG&E union, has a kind of an obligation to support SDG&E. And so it's not as easy as just having a talk over coffee to say, hey, we're going to boost your collective bargaining agreement wage rates by 8%. I mean, that'll catch some attention, but it won't change the basic dynamic. I mean, there's already a collective bargaining agreement with certain requirements. So our effort's pretty modest. Is if we can get a couple of unions to say, hey, this might be interesting, this might be something to look at, that would be maybe enough. That it's just not a Roman phalanx, every union opposed to public power for what reason. So it's a work in progress, and it's going to be a challenge.
Moving to public power is going to be a big lift and won't happen instantly, even if we would love it to. In the, right now, this summer, we have the hottest temperatures we've had since before humans evolved. Around the planet, we have the ocean at 101 degrees in Florida. I mean, it's just nuts. What can we do? What policies and what actions can we take today to push for microgrids on all public buildings and community solar, and to move in the direction of rooftop and infill solar, while we may also be working on public power initiatives? What do you think the best policies are? What can we, as NCCCA affiliated people, do today in our communities?
Well, I would say the more pressure that you can put on your elected representatives, especially state level representatives, to put pressure on the governor's office to not give lip service to climate action, and to facilitate customer-owned solar, so that all the citizens can get engaged. They can put up that rooftop solar. They can put on those home batteries and commercial building batteries. That we're in an odd situation where we have a political establishment that claims to be out in front on this, but they're carrying water for the investor-owned utilities and their holding companies, and they need to be called on it. And there's no reason that the net metering rooftop tariff was gutted, other than the governor was on board with it to be gutted. And there is no reason we're going to get fixed charges that selectively hit rooftop solar owners, other than the governor is allowing it to happen. And so I think mobilizing those that are on this call to put pressure on their elected officials, to put pressure on the governor, is a good way to go. And I'll use an example. Last December, the organization representing the solar industry, or the solar installer industry, California Solar and Storage Association, they had rallies all over the state. I was at one here in San Diego. There was one in the Capitol. They have a giant money man, Mr. Money, that they inflate it and have it going around. And I know the executive director of that nonprofit, and he said, we know that, and the governor's office told us that. It was only because we made it so painful that the governor did not authorize making that tariff even worse at that time. And so this one, at least on an operational level, I'm not talking, huge strategy, but we're in a situation where one man has made a decision to shut down an excellent tool that allows everyone to engage in climate action to the degree that they want to. And so that's what I would say. I mean, this is an embarrassment for our state. That we are leading the country in shutting down rooftop solar. That's our commitment to climate action.
Painful, isn't it? Is there, just to stay with that for a moment, is there anything we should be doing to pressure or communicate to CEA and San Diego Community Power that would facilitate more rapid action?
I'm glad you brought that up. I've had a few meetings with San Diego Community Power, and I was among a number of people here in San Diego that were pushing very hard for community choice energy several years ago. Then we got it. But if you look back at those documents, each one of them is about the number one action item is local power. We wanted the community choice aggregators so we could get local power. And several of us who were very active in that are realized that we took our eye off the ball. We thought just forming the CCA would be enough and that it would have this mission and would do it, and realized later that part of it is just structural. I mean, how do elected officials serve as the board of directors of a somewhat technical operation without just having the full-time staff run it because they don't have the background? Anyway, what the CCAs have turned into are just replicas of what the utility was doing before, signing PPAs for big arrays and distant areas. I've met with them a couple of times about doing projects like this SCE warehouse rooftop project. So, well, just aggregate the big roofs into a big project, put a PPA out for 50 megawatts. You know, it might be a cent or a cent and a half more, but within the scope of a portfolio that's pretty big, you can get started. I mean, you can do 50 megawatts, and they're just in a mindset where the only way that we show value to our customers is to find that solar array in Imperial County that we can contract for $1 less than SDG&E would have done. And so they're playing small ball. I mean, in the athletic world, they're not thinking, not only are they not they're thinking big, they're actually thinking in a way that's really opposite of what we had intended for them to be. That's one of the reasons for pursuing public power at this point. You know, the effort has been made with community choice energy, and if we don't get local control of the wires, then we're going to be playing this losing game for a long time.
Thanks for that insight, Kathy.
So Robert Ford would like to know, or he'd like to get your explanation of why the SDG&E rates are so much higher than other utilities.
Well, we should probably distinguish between investor-owned utilities and public utilities, because if we were to go back to that graphic, SDG&E rates are a little bit higher than PG&E's, but not that much. And SCE's rate, was regulated in a special way about 25 years ago, which curbed the growth of their costs. And I don't remember the particular details of that. But one of the reasons so that's for Mr. Ford, that's part of it, that the IOU rates, at least PG&E and SDG&E, aren't that different. The POU rates are much lower generally, largely because they haven't seen this explosive growth in infrastructure, especially over the last 20 years or so. Since we went to a more free market system where the utilities no longer produce all the power, there are third parties that do that. Power prices are in a market, the California Independent System Operator. Last 20 years, there's been an explosion of growth in transmission and distribution spending, which has become a bit of a scandal in the state, you know, by SDG&E and PG&E, and to a lesser extent by SCE. So that's what I know. We're in a new proceeding that's just a tentative effort to try and start ratcheting down this out of control transmission and distribution expense.
Bill, if you were writing the county decarbonization plan and framework and responsible for it, what are the key things that you would say we must do and maybe must not do?
Well, good. That allows me to repeat from earlier is that, you know, we felt in our response to the document and why it was important enough to the nonprofit to file a lawsuit was, if we use your numbers in this document, local solar power and local battery power are the best deal for the ratepayers, for the customer. And so what we have been adamant about, which the county has been resisting, is use the numbers in your document fairly. And this document is a local solar, local battery storage guide map or roadmap. And so then, as you can see from this talk, I'm pretty convinced that local solar battery power is the way to go for a lot of reasons. But most importantly, across the political spectrum, you just save money. I mean, it saves on the cost of decarbonizing.
Seems to me it's also faster, and we need speed with respect to our emissions.
You can good observation, because between 2020 and 2022, just 2 years, the solar industry, rooftop solar industry, they hit 1,200 megawatts in 2020. They exceeded 2,000 megawatts in 2022. So in basically 2 years, they almost doubled the capacity addition. And there's no problem doing multiples every couple of years if that's your lead card. I mean, if that's what you're committed to doing. So you are very true. In fact, that's one of the points you make in the lawsuit. If you want to go fast, you're going to do rooftop solar. You're not going to get balled up in landowner hassles and environmental issues with these big arrays on the ground.
Kathy?
Susan Whale would like to know what your assessment is of the UT article today that state fines San Diego Community Choice Energy Program $1 million.
Well, it shows the imbalance of power between the investor-owned utility and the community choice aggregator. Is that I'm familiar with the issue that they're talking about. And I think that the community aggregator is correct, that these community aggregators are supposed to have contracts for a certain amount of reserve power, so that things get hot and there's a lot of demand, that they can meet it. And I know they had trouble negotiating. SDG&E was kind of the gatekeeper for that source of reserve. And it was not, as I recall, was not being helpful, not making that available to San Diego Community Power. And don't hold me to that, just by recollection. But ultimately what it's showing is the imbalance of power between the investor-owned utility and a recently started community choice aggregator. And the community choice aggregator is getting, and part of the game is pull the community choice aggregators, which were not supposed to be regulated by the California Public Utilities Commission, pull them in little by little under the regulatory control of the commission. This is just another example of the commission saying, hey, you're under our control, we're going to fine you, we hear what you're saying, but we're still going to fine you. And it's just throwing another little cord around that community choice aggregator and limiting their range of operation.
Fantastic. Well, Bill, I must say, from a personal point of view, I'm on board. I agree with
I'll sign you up, Joe.
I agree with what you're saying.
Well,
and the big picture here just seems so crystal clear.
If I could make one promo pitch, which is for we have formed the Power San Diego campaign in San Diego. It is a PAC. I am the principal officer of that PAC. Anyone listening, go to wearepowersandiego.com. You will see the website that talks about this effort to get public power in San Diego. And it's a nice looking website. And so if anybody on this call wants to work on this issue in San Diego, please contact me.
Fantastic. Kathy, why don't you go with whatever remaining questions you have? I have asked those I had prepared.
Okay. So we have a couple questions about, or a comment and a question, or yeah, about going off grid. Eve wants to know, where do we start to go off grid? And John is wondering, will SDG&E figure out a way to charge us for doing that?
Both excellent questions. And that was actually back in 2014. I decided I wanted to take the family off grid to see if we could do it cost effectively even then, with the rates we're at then. That was before lithium ion batteries were commercially available. We had to use what sealed lead acid batteries to do that. And turned out I'd underestimated how many batteries I needed to do it effectively, but we did it. And we operated off grid for 3 years until this issue with the genset came up. And so you need a little, you need more solar and battery storage to do it securely than you might think, but still, so I can't give you without knowing the situation exactly, do I need 4 power walls or 3 power walls? Do I need 8,000 watts or 6,000 watts? But and we have an EV, so we're powering the house and the EV most of the time, not all of the time, EV. And so to get started, most solar installers now will talk to you about that. They'll come out to your house and tell you what solar, give you an idea of how much you would need. But the key here, which is really cutting edge, is the Achilles heel to off grid is how do you back up the house after days of cloud and rain, and you're getting no solar and you've exhausted the batteries. You either have to have a gen set or you're out of luck. But with these EVs, with all of their battery storage capability, and they just 70, 75 kilowatt hours, it's amazing because you can back up your home with that EV during times when you need it. And even if your EV starts to get drained, just drive down to the supercharger and have a cup of coffee and put another 30 or 40 kilowatt hours on it, come home and plug in again. It's a great time to consider going off grid because of the tools that we have. Now, the question about SDG&E, that's one of the reasons I did it, because people are saying, well, you can't do that. You can't go off grid. And to be frank, I didn't cut the cable. We just kept the main breaker in off position the whole time. We didn't terminate our service with SDG&E with a big hoopla and a band and all that. It was an experiment to see if we could operate off grid indefinitely, and it was successful in that way. But part of the reason I did it was to see, would anyone stop me? And if I go to put a backup gen set in my backyard, would they say, no, you can't do that? And one final little anecdote, because I know we're running out of time. This was great. So I was just doing that as a test. You can appreciate this, Kathy, just kind of walking it through as a test. So I told them, we live on a canyon, and it's a high fire area canyon. So it's a special area in the city with a high fire threat. So SDG&E has a form that you can optionally fill out if you want to put a gen set in your yard. I'm going to do everything by the book. I'm going to fill out their optional gen set. I'm going to send it to them, because I'll bet if I don't, you're going to pick up the phone and call me and ask me about it. So I fill it out, I send it in, don't hear from them. Do the plans. I go down to the city planning, go back 4 or 5 times. I show them the plan where it's going to go. 5th time, the planner looks at me, he's bored. Goes, why are you doing this? I said, I want to get off SDG&E. And he just pulled out his stamp. He didn't even say anything, just stamped it approved. And I was done. I don't know if everyone would get that treatment, but that's all he had to hear for me to get my permit to put my gen set in. So I start up the system. Who calls me? SDG&E. Say, hey, Bill. They know me. Hey, Bill, we didn't know you had a gen set. You should have contacted us about the gen set. I said, well, Ken, I did contact you. Here's the form. I sent it into your office. I filled everything out. I sent it to Joe. He said, oh, Joe sits 20 feet away from me. And they never looked at it. I sent it in. But then I said to Ken, don't hold up this permit on that. I did everything right. I crossed all the T's. I dotted all the I's. He said, Bill, I will get you that permit in 24 hours. And he did. So I had a fully permitted off-grid system. but that was part of it. Let's just see if there's some administrative hoop I haven't seen that would stop me from doing this. And there wasn't then, and we operated for years in that mode. And so, but frankly, if anyone tried to stop you from going off grid, I would raise hell, because that to me seems like such a fundamentally American basic right. You want to do that and it doesn't quite work out and you sit in the dark, you have to use some candles, that's your business. That's not the state's business. That's not SDG&E's business. So we'll do a lot more tests like this. But to me, that's, if you want to unite the people, it would be on something like that, where a company is a private monopoly, is clearly sending their rates through the roof, and then finds a way to stop individuals from doing something absolutely common sense. So that's my editorial comment.
How are we doing on time, Joe? Do we have a time for one more question, or?
Go ahead with one more and then we'll turn to Marion.
Okay, so I'm going to keep on the theme of off-grid. It's one of my favorites as well, Bill. Pamela was just commenting that they just recently put in a Neovolta system using New Day Solar as their contractor. And she's wondering if the batteries that their Neovolta batteries that they are using are the safer type of lithium-ion battery.
Almost certainly. I've worked on Neovolta project. I'm almost certain they're lithium iron phosphate. Great company.
They are. Yeah.
Great company, great battery. Great solar installer, I mean, New Day and Neovolta. And they're local talent.
Right. And I think it's I wanted to kind of draw out that question a little bit, because I think this is a kind of an important kind of development in battery technology or battery chemistry, is how much safer, you know, those lithium iron phosphate batteries are relative to what you find in the Tesla Powerwalls and the old LG Chem, or actually they're not old, they're still out there, a lot of LG Chem batteries with the nickel, manganese, cobalt chemistry that's a lot more prone to fire. So big positive development in battery chemistry that makes them a lot safer for residential use and cars too. But
yes.
Okay, that was a fascinating discussion, and the chat was really quite interesting too. So don't forget to save it if you want to go back and review some of those questions and comments. And I would like to thank Bill for being here with us tonight. You're so busy and we appreciate you taking the time. Also, again, I'd love to thank our audience because you guys are always so great. And Bill, we have a tradition here at the North County Climate Change Alliance of presenting our speakers with a tree that we have bought and purchased and will be planted in your name in an area that has been burnt out by wildfire. So that's again, great. Yes, so thank you so much. And we will say good night, and everybody take care, and we'll see you again next month. Thanks you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill.
Bye-bye.
Night.